Hey everyone, I'm Hamd, a cloud specialist with 3 AWS certifications. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the basics of deploying a Lambda function and an API gateway. This kind of architecture is key to most apps and services, and it's much simpler for developers to deploy and use compared to server-managed architectures like those involving EC2 or RDS. By the end of the video, you'll understand how Lambda works, how to create a simple program, how to integrate it with API Gateway to manage rate limiting, and finally, how to test it with a popular program called Postman. Let's get started. So in the AWS console, let's head to Lambda, and we're going to create our first function. So go over to the top right and click on Create Function. You can call it whatever you want. I'm just going to call mine my Lambda function. You're going to want to change the runtime to Python 3.13, as that's the one we'll use in this tutorial. And then we can go ahead and create the function. Once your function is fully loaded, we're going to immediately scroll down and check out the code. There's two parts of the program here. We have the handler and then this empty space outside. And this is called the initialization phase. And this is where you would usually initialize database connections or anything else you might need for your program. And this is useful because the way Lambda works is that it will initially connect to a server in the backend, which you won't know about. And anytime you re-invoke the function, it's going to try and reconnect to it. And in that case, the stuff that you need to initialize will already have been initialized. So you won't need to do it again, and your function will run faster. This is called a warm start, and it's generally what you want in most cases. However, let's say you haven't invoked the function in a long time. The initialization stuff might be lost, so you'll have to re-invoke it and do everything again. And this is called a cold start. The handler is the second part of your program, and it contains the actual code that is going to be executed when your program runs. It contains two parts, the event and the context. The event is a dictionary containing information about the invocation, so it will contain stuff like the body, the query parameters, and any other information you probably want to know. The context contains information about the actual runtime, so it will contain information such as the memory, the CPU, and potentially even the ID used by AWS to identify the invocation. So let's quickly make a program to reverse a string. So let's change this. So for this part, you don't really need to know Python, and you can just copy what I'm doing. So we're going to first take out the body. So let's create a variable called body. And we're going to set it to event and body. So essentially, this is just getting out a property from the event called body, and we'll see how this works when we test out the API. But essentially, it's just a dictionary that is supplied to the function invocation, and it'll give some extra information about the request. In this case, we're going to have it be the string that we want to reverse. However, right now, this is going to be a string, so we need to load it in using json.loads. And now our body is in our program. So now we're going to take out the string, and we're going to set it equal to body and the string property. And to reverse a string in Python, we actually only have to do this. And you don't need to know about how this works in detail, but essentially it just goes to the end of the string and then sequentially goes back to the start, and that just reverses it. So now we can use the return, which is going to be what is returned back to our user. And now we can just provide the reverse string. And that's essentially it for our program. However, to actually save it, we're going to have to deploy it. So you can go to the left over here and hit deploy. And after a bit, it should deploy. There we go. Now let's cover how to make an API gateway. So head over to the search bar and type in API, and it should appear in the search results. Now in the API Gateway console, head over to the top right and hit Create API. So there are multiple types of APIs here. There's a HTTP API, a WebSocket API, a REST API, and then a REST API but private. HTTP APIs are more commonly used as they are much more simple, and they only require a HTTP connection. WebSockets are used for persistent connections, so it creates a tunnel which can be used to communicate without having to restart a new connection. And this is more commonly used in multiplayer games or messaging services. REST APIs are similar to HTTP APIs, however you gain more control over it. However, for our case, HTTP APIs are the best. So let's go ahead and hit build. And now you can give your HTTP API a name again. I'm going to call mine My API Gateway. And we only need IPv4 addresses, so we can keep that the same. And we're not going to make any routes right now. We'll discuss that in the next section. And here we're going to add a stage. So we'll call this v1. So essentially a stage is a deployment of your API. So you can have different versions or different sections, in a sense, for your API. And this is useful if you want to separate different routes, or if you have different environments, such as production, development, or testing. So let's go ahead and hit next, and we can review and go ahead and create. So this didn't take as long as the Lambda function, but now we're in the console, so we can go ahead and create a route. Routes in API Gateway are very similar to how they work on websites, so they're just different paths that return different things. So let's go ahead and select our method. We're going to select post for this. And if you aren't aware, a method is a different type of different types of requests that HTTP requests could use. So for example, there's get, post, put, patch, etc. And these have different purposes. For example, post is when the client is trying to send data to the server, and get is when the client wants to get information from the server. However, in our case, we are going to send data to our server, and then we expect to get information back. So we're going to use post. And we can call our path whatever we want. So we're going to call it reverse. And we can go and create it. So let's select our route, and we're going to go and attach an integration. So in API Gateway, there are methods and there are integrations. A method is the process when the client makes a request to API Gateway, and you can control different things such as quota and allowed paths, etc. And an integration is the request made by API Gateway to the Lambda function in our case. So here we're going to create our integration. We're going to choose Lambda function, and we're going to search for our Lambda function. And we can go ahead and create it. So at this point, everything looks great. We can go ahead and deploy. We're going to choose our version 1 stage, and then we're going to hit deploy. Now we've deployed our API, so we're going to go to the left side, and we're going to copy our default endpoint here. Now we're going to go over to Postman. This is at postman.co. You might need to make an account. And we're going to paste in our URL for our API. And then we need to put our stage in, which is v1. And then we put in our path, which is reverse. Now we need to change our method to post, since that's what we set in the API Gateway console. And in order to actually have our program work, we need to supply a string in the body. So we're going to go to body and change it to raw. So we're going to type in some JSON, and we're going to type in our body. So we use the string property, and let's type in a string to reverse. Hello world. Now we can send our request over, and we should receive our reverse string, as we can see here. So this has been a really quick tutorial on how API Gateway and Lambda work. If you enjoyed, be sure to leave a comment, subscribe, and like the video. Thanks for watching.